everyone. Thank you for coming out on this very cool evening. And when I mean coming out, I mean sitting with us. I'm so delighted that you're here. My name is Debbie Walter. I'm with Union Public Library. I hope that you will help me get the word out about our programs. And the best way to find out our programs is to write in chat the word yes, and I will make sure you get on our email list. So that's one commercial, and you will hear a few more throughout. But mostly I want to introduce to you Regina Fitzpatrick, who is the Genealogy Librarian at the State Library, who has graciously given us her time after putting in a long day. Thank you, and please start.
Okay, wonderful. Give me just 1 second, everybody. I am going to share my screen. And then we will get started.
Can you make that? Can you make that a full?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right now. There we go.
Okay, great.
And everybody can see, correct?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to ask everybody to hold your questions. Of course, you can post them in chat throughout the presentation, but I'm going to answer questions at the end of the program. And if you'll just give me 1 second, I'm just going to turn my timer on to keep us honest and on time. The presentation tonight is going to take about an hour. A little bit about me. My name is Regina. Like I said, I am the genealogy librarian at the New Jersey State Library. I've worked at the State Library for about 5 years now, and I really love it there. But for several years before that, I worked for the New Jersey State Archives. The State Library and State Archives, as I mentioned to you before, as we were chit-chatting in the beginning, are two separate organizations. Tonight, as we discuss how to find our women ancestors in New Jersey records, we are going to be talking about records that you can mostly find at the State Archives, not at the State Library. The State Archives is a records repository. The State Library has a large collection of secondary resources. So I just want to make that very clear before we begin. One of the other things I want to make clear is that we're going to be discussing 2 time periods tonight. We are going to be talking about the vital records era in New Jersey and the earlier times when there was not as a comprehensive series of vital records available, particularly for birth and death records. So we're really lucky in New Jersey because we've been collecting civil vital records continuously since May of 1848. So we'll be talking a little bit about, you know, what to do when you don't have those vital records available to you. So with that, we're going to get started, and we are going to dive right in. And unfortunately, oops, there we go. We are going to start with some bad news, and we're going to be talking about why it's so difficult to find women in the records. Well, because women did not have a lot of social or political power, and her identity was really defined by her relationship to either her father or her husband. And those figures tend to represent the family in the official records. As a result, women's lives were often based in the home, and her tasks were confined to family affairs. If a woman was not wealthy, it was very easy for her to disappear from public records. So if you're tracing a poorer ancestor, whether male or female, but especially female, because she was generally not the head of household, although in some cases she was, she may appear and disappear from public record, and there might not really be a great explanation as to why. If a woman's memories appeared in family records, family collections often only cover a short period of time, and they don't necessarily include useful biographical information, things like employment records, school records, business records, or what her daily life was. As I said before, male head of house is the one who represented the family in official records. If we are talking about census records, which is a really easy, accessible way to research family as it existed from the 1790s, and the federal population schedules are available up through 1940 currently. Prior to 1850, only the head of house was listed. Women did not often have probated estates. In other words,
Regina?
can everybody hear me?
No.
Yeah. You were just muted for a while. I'm not sure why, but
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
back.
strange. It didn't tell me I was muted. Okay. So women did not have probated estates, particularly if they died before their spouse, because women often had community property rather than their own property, especially if we're talking, 19th century and earlier. And finally, women couldn't vote until 1920, except in New Jersey. Our original constitution in 1776 did allow women and free men of color to vote between 1776 and 1807. And unfortunately, that right was taken away. And so as a result, you don't find them on voting lists. They don't have a public or official office associated with government, and they don't have any kind of official role in records in most cases. So these are just some of the reasons why it's so difficult for us to find women in records. However, whoops, I'm sorry. I always forget when I click on the Zoom dashboard, I need to click back on the PowerPoint to get into it. However, there is some good news. Of course, as we move closer and closer to modern times, and as women gained more social and political rights, you're going to be more likely to find women in records. Again, once we get to 1850, and remember the federal population schedules are a really easy, accessible collection for researching family history. And starting in 1850, they began to list the entire household, which might include a woman who is not necessarily the head of house. By June of 1878 in New Jersey, birth, marriage, and death records are listing more authoritative biographical information. So you have, as certificate records came into being, where each individual person got their own birth, marriage, or death certificate, there was more space to include additional authoritative biographical information. If you had an immigrant ancestor who immigrated to the United States, beginning in 1907, Declaration of Intention and naturalization papers include tons of biographical information, and we're going to look at a great example of this. And finally, the best news is there have always been marriage records, and in New Jersey, there are comprehensive marriage collections dating back to the colonial era, which is really, really fantastic. And so because historically marriage has been defined as being between a man and a woman, women are always included in marriage records. So we're going to be talking, in addition to talking about records in the in the vital records era and before the vital records era, we're also going to be talking about two types of research resources. The first is called a primary document. A record. Debbie,
I'm watching.
I keep getting a notification that the host muted me.
Okay, I'm watching and I'll watch that.
Okay, awesome. So primary documents are essentially the records. These are official or private records that are created within a person's general lifetime. Examples of this include vital records, estate documents, land records, naturalizations, and private letters. We want to focus, when we're doing genealogy research, we want to focus on primary documents because the person who provided the information creating the record is usually the person themselves or somebody who knew them very well. Records are generally found in repositories such as archives and historical societies. The state archives has the official primary documents for the state of New Jersey, and that includes things like New Jersey vital records. The image on the right of the screen is the death record of a woman named Clara Madden. Mrs. Madden died in the Hudson County Hospital for the Insane in Secaucus, New Jersey in early 1916. We can see from her death record that she was a woman, that she was a person of color, how old she was, what she did for a living, where she was born, who her father was. Her mother is unknown according to this. We can see who the informant is on the death record. The informant, by the way, is Mrs. Madden's daughter, Emma Rayner, who she moved from Maryland to New Jersey to live with her daughter, Emma Rayner, in Jersey City. And she lived with her for many years before she was committed to this hospital. We can see from this that she suffered from senile dementia, although she died from a heart-related condition. We can see that it has her place of burial, although it just says Asbury Park, which is a beach town in Monmouth County, for those of you who are not familiar. And it also gives us the undertaker information. So we can see that the informant was her daughter. So the information recorded was based on the information that Emma Rayner had access to about her mother. And she provided the information that she knew. And we're going to hear more about Clara Madden's story as we move through the presentation. Oops. So those are primary documents. And again, primary documents are essentially records. Secondary resources are essentially books. These are published items that were generally produced a long time after a person's death, and the author usually didn't know the person and could not provide authoritative biographical information directly on them. Examples of secondary resources are primary documents, indexes, family histories, town and county histories, abstracts of records, and so on and so forth. Many records repositories have book collections. Libraries, of course, have them. Historical societies have them, as well as other genealogical clubs or groups that have a research service. To the right, you can see a photograph of our family history collection at the State Library, which is a great example of a secondary resource. One of the things that I want to point out to everyone that's pretty important, especially as we're in the midst of a pandemic and not everything has completely opened up, and also because many of our audience tonight is not close by, many published items can be digitized and they're available online via subscription services such as Ancestry and Heritage Quest, but also on free sites such as Google Books, HathiTrust, or archive.org. These are going to be items that are in the public domain. For published works, these are items that have been published prior to 1926. So, and this is really good news for genealogy researchers because many town histories and many family histories were written in the 19th and early 20th century. So there's a good chance that you can find this type of resource online and it should be freely available to you. One thing that I would caution you about using secondary resources, they are incredibly valuable sources of information. However, things written in that late 19th and early 20th century time period don't always cite their sources. So take what you find in these resources with a great grain of salt until you have more information. So again, secondary resources are books, essentially, while the primary documents are the actual records. So let us talk about records that you can use if you are looking for a woman ancestor after May of 1848. The best resource that you can use in New Jersey are the state vital records. These are the birth, marriage, and death records. And these should be your top priority because, again, they contain tons of authoritative biographical information. If you are looking for a birth record at least 100 years old, or a state marriage or a state death record up to December of 1930, you can order these records remotely from the New Jersey State Archives. The State Archives maintains several searchable indexes. And remember, you can order these records remotely. They have a searchable marriage index that covers May of 1848 to May of 1878. And they have two searchable death records. The first covers May of 1848 to May of 1878. And the second covers June of 1878 to December of 1900. You'll notice there are no birth records. The archive staff has not gotten to this yet. From personal experience, remember I used to work at the state archives. What archives employees are doing is they are transcribing directly from the big leather bound indexes in order to create the digital indexes. And they have just not gotten to the births yet. I started working at the state archives when I was 24 years old. I'm significantly older than that now. And they just finished the deaths, which is what I worked on one of the death index volumes when I started, and they just finished it last year. So that was like 12 or 13 years of work. However, the good news is there are additional digital indexes that you can use that are hosted by Family Search and Ancestry. You can search these indexes. However, you are still going to order the actual records from the state archives. And in addition to these searchable indexes, they also provide order forms. And if anybody has any questions or there's any confusion about this, please let me know at the end and I will do my best to clarify. I also, just for your information, I have video tutorials on using both Ancestry and Family Search where I explain this a little bit more, and those are on the genealogy research. If we are talking in particular about finding women ancestors, it's great to know that in the state civil vital records for marriages, there is a bride's index. This covers records both before and after 1900. I like using the bride's index if you're not sure of groom's surname or if his name is really easy to misspell. This is an important point because in general, the marriage collections are organized by the husband's last name. So it's really good that there is an alternate index where you can search by the bride if you need to. There are digitized indexes for New Jersey state civil vital record or civil marriage records from 1901 to 2016. And just a reminder, the state archives has the records available to order remotely up through December of 1930. The searchable index is up on Ancestry. You can also download the PDFs from Reclaim the Records, who posted the indexes, and those are via archive.org. And just a reminder, the state archives does have that marriage index from May of 1848 to May of 1878, and it's searchable by bride and groom's names, and you can order the records from the state archives directly from there. Just another fantastic example. I picked this particular example because it was typed, which is very exciting because it's very easy to read. And just looking at this example, we can see all of the information that is available on both the bride and groom. And this includes their full names, their place of marriage, the date of marriage, the time of marriage, where each of them lives, how old they are, whether they've been married before. We can see that the groom was widowed in the past, occupations, where they were born, parents' names, including the mother's maiden name in both cases, which is really fantastic for getting us back a generation as we are doing genealogy research. We have witnesses listed, and we have the officiant and the name of the church. So we get a whole lot of information from this, plus useful information on women in this family so that we can get back a generation and research maternal lines as well. So let's talk a little bit about naturalizations. I know that many of us in New Jersey have ancestors who immigrated from a different country. Since we are talking particularly about women, we're focusing on naturalizations after women gained the right to vote. Before 1920, when the 19th Amendment was passed, which gave women in the United States rights to suffrage, women would rarely naturalize on their own. If they were not the head of their household, they would naturalize under their father or husband. My own great-grandmother came no, I'm sorry, my great-great-grandmother came over from Italy. She was widowed. So she was one of the rare pre-1920 exceptions where she actually naturalized by herself. So you may find that if a woman was widowed or was single and wanted to naturalize, she may have if she was the head of house. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with naturalization records. So I want to make it clear that there are two parts to a naturalization. The first part is the declaration of intention, which establishes an individual's desire to become a United States citizen. The second part is the petition for naturalization. The petition is filed once the applicant meets a residency requirement. And if the petition is approved and filed by the court, the person then becomes a US citizen. Yay. These records are always filed with the County Court of Common Pleas in New Jersey. And the records themselves are held by the county clerk's office through the mid-20th century. I want to show you an example of a post-1907 and post-1920 naturalization file. One of the things that I did not put on my slide in the interest of keeping things short is that all the paperwork related to a naturalization, including the declaration of intention, plus any additional paperwork or information. This might include a legal name change or anything of that nature, is going to be filed with the petition for naturalization. So if you have the opportunity in post-pandemic times to visit a repository in New Jersey to research this yourself, always look under the petition for naturalization, because all of the information, the complete application and all the paperwork, including the declaration of intention, are going to be included as part of the application. And I can repeat that in the Q&A as well. So you can see that in this case, on the left of our screen, I've blown up the declaration of intention. And why did I do that? Because in Burlington County and also many other smaller counties in New Jersey that are less population dense, a picture of the applicant is included. So we get to see what this lady, Catherine Volku, actually looks like. And in addition, we get our signature. We get tons of biographical information just from her declaration of intention. And just as a reminder, the declaration is the first part of the naturalization process. She's expressing her desire to become a United States citizen. And once she meets the residency requirement, she can then file her petition for naturalization. So this, the declaration of intention, and you're going to find a lot of the same information duplicated in the petition for naturalization, which is the other reason I didn't blow it up. You're going to find basically the same information, but this one, you know, the declaration has her picture, so it's more interesting. So we find, in terms of biographical information, what is included: her home address, her occupation, how old she is, a physical description, her race, her nationality, where she was born, her date of birth, her husband's name, his date of birth, where she was married, where she arrived to the United States and the date she arrived. It lists her American children who were born in the United States, but it still gives you their their date of birth. She has two daughters, Viola and Beth. It gives you her last place of residence in her natal country, her port of departure, port of arrival, what name she traveled under, and the name of her ship. In addition, we get her signature. And so we learn a lot about Catherine Volku from this document. The top two images on the right are her petition for naturalization. We can see that her petition for naturalization was approved in 1939. Interestingly, there is also an oath of allegiance to the United States, which is dated 1943. So this is in the thick of World War II. You'll notice that the document below comes from the Department of Justice. And although this petition was approved in 1939, it asked the court to hold off on approving her naturalization because the country in question, Romania, is at war with the United States. Now, the political entity that she emigrated from, she emigrated in 1914. So the political entity, as it is currently, where she was from, and I'm not sure without any background research or context if it would still be Hungary or not, but that area is at war. Whatever that political entity is, the country, it was probably under Nazi control at the time, is at war with the United States. So this document below is asking to hold the petition until once Catherine above in her petition for naturalization signs the oath of allegiance, she officially becomes a United States citizen. So although her petition is dated 1939, they finally allowed her to become a US citizen in 1943. So that's something really interesting we learn about her in addition. One of the things I didn't talk about that I believe is on the next slide as well, there might be an oath of allegiance for a woman who was born in the United States but lost her citizenship due to marriage. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. However, there is in addition to these documents, there is also a certificate of arrival, which is included as part of her naturalization application. And that is in the center right below the first page of the petition for naturalization. And it gives her maiden name, when she arrived, and the name of her ship. So this entire application gives us tons of information about this woman. And this is kind of an ideal document where we really, really learn tons about this subject. So of course, any genealogist would be thrilled to discover something like this for their own family, especially if they're trying to get back to the old country and further trace the family from there. So let's talk a little bit about how to confirm a woman's citizenship prior to 1920. Again, most women, before they had the right to vote in the United States, naturalized under their husband or their father. So you can look him up. Remember, after 1907, or starting in 1907, there's going to be a lot of good biographical information. So a man's application may list his dependents who will become naturalized under his own application. And this could include his wife and any minor children as well. As I mentioned, if a woman got married, if she was a foreign national who married a US citizen, her marriage would confer his citizenship status to her. Unfortunately, in the United States for a period of many years, and this was largely due to anti-Asian racism, if a US citizen, so someone who was born here in the United States, married a man who wasn't a citizen, she might lose her citizenship and have to reapply to become a US citizen. Some very interesting reading is the Expatriation Act of 1907, which lays all of this out, all of the terms by which a woman might lose her citizenship. Some women who lost their citizenship were not able to reattain their citizenship until the 1940s. And they had to take that oath of allegiance, like we saw on Catherine Volku's naturalization, and just be aware that she did not lose her, Catherine Volku, our example, did not lose her naturalization status due to marriage. They held off approving her petition because her country of birth was at war with the United States. So just to be clear, but if you are in a situation where you had a woman, US citizen, marry a non-citizen, you might find an oath of allegiance attached to her petition for naturalization. Beginning in 1900, in addition, and this is another primary documents resource that you can check in addition to the actual naturalization collection. If you check the census beginning in 1900, they have a citizenship status column next to a person's name with little codes in them. AL equals alien, aka the person is not a citizenship. PA means that the person has filed the declaration of intention and they're in the process of fulfilling the residency requirement. And NA means that they are a naturalized citizen. So you'll start seeing this beginning in 1900, and that's a fantastic and useful way to track when your relative may have become a citizen, especially if you're having difficulty finding people in indexes or having any other additional difficulties locating your relative in the actual naturalization collections. The census is a really great place to start beginning in 1900. So that gives us a very nice segue into the census records. Both federal and state records are really fantastic for finding and tracing our women ancestors. Of course, this becomes really useful for us primarily starting in 1850, which starting in 1850, the entire household was listed. Census information about women might include their age, the month and year of their birth, which is fantastic for chasing down vital records, their country of origin, how many children living or dead the woman gave birth to, their occupation, their number of years married, which might help us chase down a marriage record, and the street address where they were living, which of course will help us establish residency in a particular place. A lot of people don't know for New Jersey, and this is another way that we are incredibly lucky here in New Jersey, that New Jersey took state censuses between 1855 and 1915, and these work pretty much just like the federal census, but instead of being on the 0 year, they're on the 5 year. And these occurred between 1855, 1915. They're all online. They're all on Ancestry and Family Search, and you can search them there. This is really nice for doing New Jersey research, because if you use both the federal population schedule and the state censuses together, you can narrow a 10-year gap between the censuses into a 5-year gap. And this is going to be really relevant when we are talking about the late 19th century. As many genealogy enthusiasts know, the 1890 federal population schedule was largely destroyed by fire. And so much of it is lost to us. So if we are just looking at the federal census, we have a 20-year gap between 1880 and 1900. So using the federal and state censuses together, we can go from 1880 to 1885, which is 5 years, 1885 to 1895, 10 years, and 1895 to 1900, another 5 years, which makes our gaps in research a lot more manageable. This was particularly helpful for me when I was searching for Clara Madden. You'll remember we looked at Mrs. Madden. We looked at her death record right in the beginning. The lady who contacted me, who was Mrs. Madden's ancestor and was interested in finding out where she was interested in confirming, one, that she died in New Jersey, and was also looking for her place of burial. She gave me some background information on Clara Madden. Mrs. Madden had previously been enslaved in Maryland. She had numerous children with a white man who formerly enslaved her. While he was living, she was in possession of a nice house in Baltimore. We can see, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, she seems to be fairly well off. You can see that her older children are all at school, so she had things pretty good. But of course, once the man who fathered her children and previously enslaved her died, she of course lost that property, and her circumstances and that of her children became greatly reduced. So what I did in order to find Mrs. Madden, because the lady who was researching her basically lost track of her after 1900, but this lady also didn't know about the state censuses. So I went from 1870 to 1880, which is on the lower right. I could not find Clara Madden in any of the New Jersey state censuses. I did find her in 1900. I did not find her in 1905. So originally I had thought that she died between 1900 and 1905 because she also wasn't on the 1910 census. However, then I found our top image, which is the 1915 New Jersey State Census. And there's a Clara Madden listed. She was in northern New Jersey. She had lived in Jersey City. We can see that she's in the Hudson County Hospital for the Insane. The individual on this census is a Black female. Her age does not line up with the other censuses. However, I figured that could be her. Through other censuses and city directories, I had her daughter Emma Rayner's address as well. And some of the city directories listed Clara as living at the same address as Emma Rayner. And so that's how I knew that the death certificate that we saw was this lady's ancestor, Clara Madden. And that confirmed it was the Hudson County Hospital for the Insane. I figured if Mrs. Madden had been institutionalized, there was a really good chance that she would have a death record. So this was a genealogical triumph for me, helping the lady find her ancestor and also giving her a clue as to where she might be buried. I did not hear whether or not the ancestor was able to find Mrs. Madden's grave or not. She did not let me know, but at least she had a path to move forward. So you can see how powerful and effective tracing a family through the census over time and using state and federal censuses together can lead to you finding records from Mrs. Madden's example. So let's talk, we've focused a lot on the vital records era. Many of us also have early 19th century and colonial ancestors as well. So if your ancestor lived outside of the vital records era, here's what you can do, particularly if you are looking for a woman. The estate records, aka wills and other probate documents, extend back to the 17th century. This is probably the closest thing you are going to find to a death. And I say this because many, while there are church records and cemetery records, these are largely, unfortunately, not very comprehensive. Whereas the estate records were stored in repositories for years and years and years. So the state civil collection is far more comprehensive. The will and probate documents will not give you an exact date of death. However, they will give you the probate year, which tends to be the same as the year of death. There are indexes up to 1900. And if you are looking 1817 and earlier, there's a published series of will abstracts. These were published in, I think both the index and the abstracts were published in 1914. So both are public domain and they've been digitized. Both indexes are available online. We also have them in print at the State Library, and the State Archives has them as well. So you can get the digitized index online. I believe Ancestry also has a searchable index to both publications as well. So you can actually search by name if you have access to Ancestry. So you start with estate records. Remember, probate year generally equals year of death. That will help you narrow down the death date. Then you move back to marriage. There is a collection called Colonial Marriage Bonds with a searchable index available on the State Archives website. We're going to be talking about both colonial marriage bonds and county marriages. The county marriage collection, which is owned by county clerk's offices throughout New Jersey, have been digitized via familysearch.org. So you can get access to the digital images there. You can also check early land records and Supreme Court case files, which are in the searchable online indexes are on the State Archives website. And then, of course, when you are delving into church records and cemetery records, you're going to be looking into books, particularly published indexes and family histories, because they may give you exact date of death, which can lead you into the records or may help you find an exact date of death if you just have something like a will, which confirms the probate year. So let's talk about a few of these collections. If you are looking for estate papers, you can order these from the State Archives between 1617 and 1952. There's an order form on the State Archives website. You can search for the woman herself. Remember, a lot of women did not have their own probate estate. But it might also be helpful to search for her parents because she may have been left a bequest. Usually if a woman was married and her parents are leaving her money, her husband's name will be listed, so that will confirm who she's married to, and that might lead you to a marriage record. You already know who the woman is married to, you can check for her husband. Even if he does not have a will, his wife may serve as his executor, so you could get her signature, and you could get a document which confirms that they are married. So that will confirm. The probate records will confirm that they are married, and then you can search for a marriage. You can also check for a woman's siblings or her grandparents, as again, there's a will. Women might be granted a bequest, might identify who she's married to or who she is the daughter of, or how she is related to the estate. This example is one of my favorite stories in the annals of New Jersey history. Elizabeth Tatham very tragically died in childbirth in 1700, and she lost her husband John only a few months before she herself died. Again, she died in childbirth. In the center of the screen, we can see the abstract of her estate. The Tatham family was fabulously wealthy. Their home in Burlington was described as a palace. That's how opulent it was. If you read through the inventory of her goods, it is incredibly impressive and pages long. So you can see she leaves quite a long will. You can see Elizabeth's will is on the left of our screen. We can see her signature on the document and that she signed with a seal. What is interesting is in her will, she disowns her daughter, Dorothy Hickman. And the background story of this is Dorothy ran away with a man named Robert Hickman, who was a pirate from Madagascar. And he was arrested and sent over to England to stand trial for piracy at the same time as Captain Kidd was. He was transported with him back to England. Captain Kidd was hanged, Robert was spared. Elizabeth and her husband John both disinherited their daughter. However, on the right of the screen, we have one of the most powerful and interesting documents that I have seen. There's a memorandum associated with Elizabeth Tatham's estate. While Elizabeth was giving birth and was in childbirth, she recanted disowning her daughter Dorothy and left her 200 pounds. This document is really extraordinary to me because it describes her recantation, and because the people who heard her testify to this fact were all women, because she was in the process of giving birth. And it's very unusual to see a document that is dominated by women. So we see the marks or the signature of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 women who all attested to the fact that Elizabeth wanted her daughter Dorothy to have 200 pounds. So the document on the right is one of my favorite documents I've ever seen in colonial research because of that. And I think it's a brilliant and powerful document to know about, and it's incredibly special because it's very unusual to have women dominating in an official record in any way, shape, or form. So again, this is an example of when things go incredibly right and you really find a ton of information about a person. If anybody has any questions about the estate or wants to hear more about the soap opera story about Dorothy, I'm happy to tell you more during the Q&A. So I'm going to show you, people are very surprised that deeds can be such a genealogical gold mine. And I'm going to show you just a page, a short paragraph of a deed that allowed me to build an entire family tree and has so much fantastic family information. So the document on the right of our screen is the first page of a document, a land sale in New Jersey. And by the way, all parties lived in England, but they owned land in New Jersey. And the primary seller is a woman named Mary Bullens, and she and her co-sellers are selling land to Robert Thompson, Richard Audie, Christopher Snowden, and Gervais Neek. Samuel Barker was the gentleman who originally owned the land. He died, and his family is selling land that is inherited from his estate. Just from this paragraph, we learn how family members are related to Samuel Barker and how they're related to each other, where everyone lives and what their occupation is, and the eldest child in some of the family group. As we read further in the document, so outside of this paragraph, we get an abstract of Samuel Barker's will. He left a great deal of land to his grandson, Samuel Bowlby, who died. And so then Mary Bullens, his niece, became the executor of his estate and primary beneficiary as well. So from this family tree, we get Samuel, we get his children, we get his grandchildren, and in one case, we get a great-grandchild. We know who is deceased in this document, and we know who the eldest child is in some of the family groups. So again, this is an incredible example. It's a woman dominated. It's very unusual for a woman to be the beneficiary and to have such a huge benefit like this. And we get tons of family information on this particular group. So again, an excellent example, and what we really want to see when we stumble across a family deed. Colonial marriage bonds. Again, there has been some kind of marriage collection for the state of New Jersey continuously dating back to the 17th century. These are not as comprehensive or as informative as the 1940s marriage certificate we saw earlier in the presentation. The colonial marriage bonds are incredibly boilerplate and they share very little information. The bonds were taken out by the groom and usually witnessed by a male family member of the bride. And these were agreements that were put in place to ensure that there was no impediment to the marriage. There was no other marriage contract in existence, and both parties were free to proceed. The other thing that I would say is usually for colonial marriage bonds, one of the two parties had to have some money, because for poor people, did it really matter? And unfortunately, that was the attitude. Also, you had to put up 500 pounds. You had to swear a surety of 500 pounds in order to take this bond out. So it was only accessible to the wealthy. Again, very boilerplate. You can see that portions of the marriage bond on the right are printed. So it's very standard language and only certain things are filled in. The information that a colonial marriage bond might provide for you are the parties' names, sometimes the occupation of the groom, and a county of residence, although that sometimes none of this is available for either party. What is useful is that the age of majority at the time was 21 years old. So if either the bride or the groom was underage, they would need to get a signed permission note from their parents to take out the bond. This was usually dad, but sometimes it was mom, particularly if dad had already died. And sometimes I've seen both parents sign. So it's something useful that you can use to take back a generation, but that's only if the parties were not of age, aka 21 years old. The date on the bond is not a date of the actual marriage, only the date the bond was signed. However, if you're going to put up 500 pounds in order to swear there's no impediment to be married, I guess that somebody would have to die in order for the couple, not to get married. There is like a 99.99999% chance that the couple did in fact go on to get married. Included as part of this collection, the Colonial Marriage Bonds collection, which again has a searchable online index on the State Archives website, there are also limited early colonial marriage records, which do have an actual marriage date. The bond on the right is between Edward Pierce, who was an attorney, and Catherine Talbot, who was the widowed wife of Robert Talbot and the daughter of former New Jersey Governor Jeremiah Bass. Edward Pierce was her second marriage. So these again were high-ranking citizens who took out this bond, and they were indeed married. Edward and Catherine were married for about 9 years before Edward's untimely death. We know it was sudden and untimely because Edward died intestate. And they had only been married 9 years. They only had one child, and it was a daughter. So just a little bit of background, but this document, at least proves that the couple did in fact get married. Even after the colonial era into the early 19th century, there are county marriage records. These cover from the county's formation date, and if you're dealing with an older county, this is usually dating from the 1790s up to around 1900. So they do overlap with the state civil vital records. Again, these don't have the comprehensive information that you're going to find like we saw on that marriage certificate earlier in the program. However, they are going to at least give you confirmation that a couple did marry. They usually provide the parties' names, the exact date of marriage, the location of marriage, and who the officiant was. Again, this is a digital collection, a digital searchable collection, so you can search by an individual's name on familysearch.org. In this case, for the marriage of John Barry and Alice Hogan, this is really interesting because this marriage return also includes witnesses. And the two witnesses are Michael Barry and John Fritz. Michael Barry, I would presume, is related to John Barry, and we don't know who John Fritz is or how he is related, but I'm sure since this is dated 1853, we could do some digging, particularly in census records or even in will records, which might have kinship information included, and figure out how these two are related. So there's a lot that we can investigate from this particular record. And I wanted to include this again because it's highly unusual for witnesses to be included, and that might give us some further clues. So that being said, where do we start looking for women ancestors in New Jersey records? If you're looking in the vital records era, you're always searching for those vital records. And you'll start with death. And then you are going to move on to the bride's index if you don't know the groom's name or if his name is incredibly difficult to misspell. Remember, after 1900, you can search the bride's index, and that searchable marriage index on the State Archives website from May of 1848 to May of 1878 is searchable by both bride and groom. If you're looking outside of the vital records era, so before May of 1848, and your relative also died before May of 1848, because remember, if they lived any time in the vital records era, you are always going for those vital records first. So if a person died after May of 1848, you're still going to look up a death record for them. But if they died before May of 1848, you'll look at the estate records because you want that probate year, which will at least give you a clue as to when they died. Probate year is generally the same as the year of death. And then depending on the time period, you can either check the colonial marriage bonds or the county marriage records. Those collections, since their marriage, will always have a woman listed. When you are doing your research in general, you start with the last events in a person's life, which is their death, and you work your way forward through their lives, including the marriage and the birth. And you do that for each individual in your line, going backwards through time. So thank you all very much. I'm happy to take any questions. If you have more detailed questions that I can't answer tonight, please feel free to send me an email. And please also feel free to check out the genealogy research guide. If you all give me a minute, I can post the link for that in chat. You can also send me an email and I'm happy to link it to you. So thank you all so much. And Debbie, do we have any questions?
We do, Regina. Mary asks if there is a reason why a marriage in Pennsylvania was on an index in New Jersey during 1915.
A marriage in Pennsylvania that actually took place in Pennsylvania?
I don't know if Mary is still with us or not. If she is, she can unmute. But that's the question.
Because the event would have to take place in New Jersey, unless there was some kind of indexing mistake, but I have never seen or heard of that before.
I thought that was really odd myself.
Yeah.
Because she had been living in Pennsylvania, in a steel town there. And this was at least the middle of Pennsylvania. It wasn't even close to New Jersey. The first wife had died, and it looks like it's the cousin that now steps up a few weeks later to marry this widower with 3 young children. And in fact, as I studied this family, it looks like the entire extended family and cousins and everyone lived on the same street in the steel town and were working at the steel mill. So I did quite a bit of research on them, but I was just really puzzled because I know where they were married in the local church. They're all buried there. They all married there. And yet when I was looking at, I find both of them in this index in New Jersey. And I said, well, what's that about? It was 1915.
Have you ordered the actual record? Because maybe it's not them, particularly if they have pretty common names.
Yeah, Yeah, I don't know.
I would order, if you think that there's a chance it's them, sometimes only the actual record can answer that question.
Okay.
So you may need to just break down, go to the archives website and order the actual record. Did you look at this, did you look up the index on Ancestry? So it was in the New Jersey Marriage Index.
You know, I think that's where I found it.
Okay, if it was on, because in addition to the New Jersey Marriage Index on Ancestry, there's another collection that's a mixture of New Jersey and Pennsylvania church records that I believe does extend up into the 20th century. So if you found them there, that is not the New Jersey Civil Vital Records Index, but
What kind of index would that be that they would do that? And why?
Well, I don't know what specifically it is, but the Family History Library collected just an amalgamation of church records and shoved it into one collection. And it's called something like the New Jersey and Pennsylvania church records or something like that. If you send me an email, I can look it up and I can tell you what it is. But if you're sure that you found it on that Reclaim the Records Index, the New Jersey Marriage Index from 1901 to 1916, order the record from the archives and just see what it is.
And can you tell me what Reclaim the Records is?
So Reclaim the Records is a nonprofit organization and they're doing really awesome work. They are trying to make sure that records that are supposed to be publicly accessible are made so. So they have filed Oprah requests with several state governments, particularly for records themselves or indexes that are of genealogical significance. And so they were able to get the indexes for New Jersey state vital records published online. They were able to work with the New Jersey Department of Health, get an Oprah request, get access to those indexes, and they undertook efforts to digitize those. So that's why we have the nice searchable indexes online. The records, the actual certificate records are not available online. You still need to order them either from the state archives or if it's after 1930 for marriages and death from the Department of Health, or if it's a birth record less than 100 years old from the Department of Health Office of Vital Statistics and Registry is the official name of this subdivision.
I'm going to cut Mary off so we can get to Linda Alexander's question. Linda, did you want to ask it yourself? Are there any extant voting records between 1776 and 1802?
Yes, there are. And the state archives has them. There are voting lists. There was a really interesting article done, and I think it was in the New York Times, where they studied the time period where women and free men of color were allowed to vote in the period, and they actively looked for those people on voting lists, and those records come from the state archives. If you have any questions about that, I'm going to put the archives reference email in the chat right now. So you would email them to ask about that particular collection. I'm not sure that they're doing reference services on it or not. Now, those voting lists are simply going to be lists of names, and they're usually broken down by municipality. So it's not going to give you biographical information, but still, it's pretty darn cool to see your ancestor listed on a voting list during that time period.
Elsa, I'm going to keep these a little bit short because we're running out of time,
Yeah.
but Elsa, take it
A
away.
quick question. How do I look up for the naturalization application? Let's say someone did it between 1950 and 1960. Are they available?
Yes, they are available. However, they work differently in the 1950s. Usually those are filed at the federal level rather than at the county level, like previous naturalizations were done. So depending on where you are in New Jersey, the records are either going to be at the National Archives Philly branch for South and Central, no, not even Central Jersey, just for South Jersey. They'll be at the National Archives Philly branch. And for everybody else in the state, they're going to be at the National Archives New York branch.
Okay, so I have to look at the National Archives of New York if it happens to be in Carteret, New Jersey.
Yes.
Okay.
Corey, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. So I have found in the marriage index, a marriage from 1930 somewhere in New Jersey. And it has listed a volume and a page number, but my question is, do I still have to send away for that, or is there a place where I can go see it?
No, none of the records are digitized, only the indexes.
Okay.
So if you found a marriage record from the 1930s, AKA 1931 and on, you're writing to the Department of Health, Bureau of Vital Statistics to get the actual certificate.
Yeah, this is 1930, so I guess it would still be archives.
Yes, you would then write to the state archives. And they have order forms on their website.
Okay, so if in the index it doesn't say where they got married or the actual date, it just says the year. Okay, I just wondering if I was missing something. So
No,
how long does it take usually to get something from the archives?
Well, right now I just had lunch with my friend John who works there, and he said right now they're really in demand. They're averaging over 1,000 orders per day, so they have a huge backlog. They used to say that their turnaround time was about a month. Now they're like 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
So you will need to wait a little bit. But the nice thing is that what they're doing now is rather than snail mailing you copies, they'll scan and digitize. Right. They'll send you a digital copy of the record.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, would you like to ask your question? For a relative, Tom, are you there? For a relative who came to New Jersey in approximately 1915 from Europe, where would I find the entry records?
Entry records depends on port of entry. Good place to start is Ancestry. They have a lot of the port records.
So it would have been Ellis Island.
So if it was Ellis Island, yes. Ancestry definitely has a searchable index. You can also go on ellisisland.org. You can search there to see. I find Ancestry is more accessible. I believe for ellisisland.org, you do need to create a free account there. So you may just want to search Ancestry to start with, and then if you can't find it, then maybe go on ellisisland.org.
Tom, go ahead, Regina, I'm sorry.
And see if you can find it there. So those would be my 2 suggestions. However, I will say if they settled in New Jersey, and since they emigrated after 1915, if you get the Declaration of Intention and Petition for Naturalization, that's going to have that nice detailed biographical information. So you might get more information if you order the records.
I just want to add that we did a program a month ago, 2 months ago, I can't remember time anymore, with somebody from the Staten Island Foundation and Ellis Island Foundation. So we have a good contact there. So if you dead end, let me know. You can watch that recording and all recordings that we do on our YouTube station, which you can get at www.uplnj.org. I also am really appealing to everybody to please let me put you on our newsletter list so that you can find out about all of our programs. For instance, in 2 weeks, we're doing a program on America's history through its national parks. And we have some really great programs coming up, letters from Oscar Hammerstein, all kinds of things, an improv class, an antique roadshow where you can bring in an item, and programs as great as they are today, thanks to Regina. You can follow us on Facebook, and I encourage you to do that. Go to our website, and I'm going to put all this in the chat. So I don't know if anybody has any last minute questions, but I want to thank Regina very much for coming tonight and sharing her expertise with us. Are there any more questions? I'm going to stop recording. Maybe that will help.
Yeah.